I'm a longtime listener of your show. I'm a hunting guide by profession based in Montana. Never thought I'd be writing in about something like this, but here we are. Last Tuesday, I was leading a group through the Gallatin National Forest. We were tracking elk. Nothing out of the ordinary for that day. Just going through the motions of explaining tracking signs and showing the group how to spot the fresh tracks and droppings. Around dusk, we started noticing a few odd things. Firstly, the forest was too quiet. Now, I've been in the woods enough to know that when it gets that quiet, something's not right. Then this stench hit us. Not just wet dog, but something else mixed in, like the smell of garbage that's been sitting in the hot sun with a weird hint of sulfur. We stumbled upon this creature next. I say stumbled upon because I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen it myself. It was massive. I'd say somewhere between 7 to 9 feet tall. The moonlight made its black and brown fur glisten, muscles rippling under the skin as it moved. It had a hump on its back and a massive body that made me think of those bodybuilder types, all wide shoulders and big chest. But what really stuck with me was the face. It had a snout like a German shepherd, but broader, and I could see a double row of teeth, fangs really, that shone in the moonlight. The ears were pointy, reminded me of a Doberman pinscher. It had a demonic look to it, and the eyes. They were the worst part, glowing faintly in the dark. The encounter felt surreal, like something out of a horror movie. I've been hunting for the better part of 3 decades, Donovan, but this thing scared me. I felt a cold rush of fear, my heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer. The creature seemed to be as surprised to see us as we were to see it. It let out this low guttural growl before it took off into the woods. It didn't run like an animal would. It stood upright on its hind legs just like a man. After the creature disappeared, we all just stood there for a moment, shell-shocked. We quickly packed up and left the area. On the way back, nobody talked much. The encounter left us all with a feeling of unease. We got back to town around midnight. Next day, I returned to the area with a few of the local guys. I felt obligated to, in case this thing was a threat to folks around here. The smell was gone by then, but we could see clear signs where it had been broken branches, disturbed ground. As professionals, we couldn't help but inspect its tracks. The footprints were like nothing we'd seen before. They looked somewhat like a dog's, but were far too large. And there was a clear bipedal pattern. They were scattered around the area, too randomly for my liking. It didn't feel like the creature was scared or fleeing, more like it was curious and observing us. The tracks led to a dead elk nearby. It was ripped apart, and the smell of blood was overwhelming. The way it was killed, it seemed more savage than any natural predator I've come across. The scene was brutal, as if something had played with its food. Everyone was quiet on the way back. There's a tension in town now. People are scared, and with good reason. This isn't a ghost story or some urban legend. It's real. It's here in our backwoods. I thought your audience might want to hear about this. This isn't just for the thrill of the story, but also as a caution for those in the area or planning a trip here soon. The woods are a beautiful place, but they're also wild. And sometimes they remind us just how wild they can be. I'm Sam, a geologist surveying in the remote areas of the Pacific Northwest. We were out here drilling for core samples to analyze the positioning of the strata of the region. It was late because we'd been working in the evening to avoid the heat of the day. While I was operating the drill, I started to pick up on something out of place. The smell. It was a sulfurous scent, like a struck match or a rotten egg. At first, I wondered if the drill had hit something in the earth. But there was something else too, a noise. Not mechanical or geological, but animalistic. A low rumble that you actually felt more than you heard. It was too quiet to be thunder, too resonant to be the machinery. The sound was persistent, almost rhythmic, like the pulse of a massive heart buried deep in the earth. As I tuned into it, it became clearer, a resonant growl, fluctuating in pitch, that occasionally pierced through the hum of our equipment. The rumble, originating from somewhere within the darkness, felt foreboding and unnatural. Each time the sound rippled through the air, I felt a strange sense of anticipation, a nagging feeling that we were not alone. Then I saw it. Against the backdrop of the dense forest, a creature was silhouetted. Its height varied, I'd say, between 6 to 10 feet. It seemed to shift somehow, as if it were contorting or changing shape. Its body was an unusual mix of features. I saw bat-like wings fold and stretch, and what looked like the head of a goat. There was something oddly reptilian about its body, though. I'd say it was brown or black, but the low light made it hard to be sure. The creature, although still shrouded in shadow, had a grotesque appearance that was a bizarre mix of animals. The wings were undoubtedly bat-like, appearing both leathery and solid. They tucked and folded against its body in a way that reminded me of how a bird shields itself from the cold. The head of the creature was a complete anomaly. With the profile of a goat, it appeared almost common, but the devilish twist in its features was far from ordinary. Its eyes, a piercing yellow, glowed like the beam of a flashlight cutting through the dark, focused and unyielding. Then there was the body, which I could now see a bit better scaled like a reptile. It glistened in the low light, reflecting an almost oily sheen. It was elongated and powerful, a contradiction to the typical form of a mammal or bird, but in sync with the abnormality of this beast. Its color, somewhere in the range of deep brown to black, gave it an added layer of menace, enabling it to blend effortlessly into the dark. It was clear this creature was adapted to its environment, a deadly predator lurking in the shadows. The sight of this thing, it gave me chills. Not just from fear, though, there was plenty of that. More like a sense of profound unease, as if I was looking at something that simply shouldn't exist. Every instinct in my body screamed at me that this creature didn't belong here, or anywhere in the natural world I was familiar with. Yet there it was, real as anything else in that forest. Finally, it emitted a strange sound, a sort of roar, but I can't really describe it. Then it launched itself into the air, and with a gust of wind and a rustling of leaves, it was gone. After it left, I shut everything down, packed up as quickly as I could, and told everyone we had to get out of there. We were done for the day. Back at the base camp, I wrestled with how to convey what I had seen. I was met with skepticism, understandably. Their laughter was nervous, the kind that fills an uncomfortable silence when people don't know what to believe. A few exchanged glances as if questioning my sanity. But there was also an undercurrent of apprehension. I could tell some of them were unnerved by the conviction in my voice, the detail in my story. I didn't expect them to believe me right away, but the doubt on their faces added another layer of unease to the already surreal encounter. It's one thing to experience something like this alone. It's another to confront the disbelief of your peers, realizing that your experience has isolated you in some ways. As days passed, an unspoken agreement seemed to take hold. We avoided discussing the incident. There was a change in our routines. People stayed closer to the base after dark. The evening chatter was subdued, and there was an undeniable tension that lingered in the air. Even without any confirmation or validation, the group had been affected in some way by the encounter. It seemed to stir an instinctual unease in all of us, a primal part of our brains recognizing something inherently other. Since then, I've done a bit of research, trying to find any local legends or reports of similar encounters. I found a few here and there, but nothing concrete. It's unsettling, not knowing what I saw, but I'm sure of one thing: I won't be returning to that drilling site anytime soon. My name's Jake. I'm an avid hiker from Oregon and a fan of your show. I thought I'd share something with you that happened to me a couple of weeks ago while hiking in the Cascade Range. You might find it interesting for your program. I was in the Cascades on a solo trip. I wanted to spend some time alone with nature and figured there's no better place to do so than the Oregon wilderness. I was on my third day of hiking, aiming to reach a remote alpine lake that I'd heard was particularly beautiful this time of year. It was late afternoon when I first noticed something unusual. I was navigating a steep trail, still a good hour from the lake, when I heard an unfamiliar noise echoing through the trees. It was a low growl that didn't match anything I've heard in the wild. My first thought was a bear, but it didn't sound right. Too deep, too guttural. A sudden foul stench hit me next. A mix of wet dog, rotting meat, and something else I couldn't quite place. A sulfurous smell. My heart started racing and I knew instantly something was off. I've seen my share of wildlife in my time, but this was different, almost unsettling. And then I saw it, Donovan. At first, I thought my eye were playing tricks on me. But as my vision focused, I could clearly see this massive creature standing upright about 50 yards away. It was tall, around 8 feet by my guess, with a massive body that looked like it belonged to a bodybuilder. I noticed a thick, dark mane around its neck and shoulders, resembling a cape draped over its wide shoulders. Its legs were thick and muscular, like those of a dog, yet they ended in what looked like human feet. The creature's face was partially hidden by the shadow of the trees, but I could make out a long, broad snout and 2 pointy ears that looked similar to a German shepherd's. It let out another guttural growl. Despite the fear, I was entranced. It was terrifying yet fascinating. The wilderness had always been a source of peace for me, but in that moment, I felt fear. I also felt a strange sense of wonder, the kind you feel when confronted by something utterly foreign, something that challenges your understanding of the world. Still trying to make sense of what I was seeing, I instinctively reached for my phone to take a photo. But the creature's ears twitched and it quickly turned its head towards me, revealing a face that was eerily dog-like, yet somehow monstrous. The snout was broad and looked almost like that of a Doberman pinscher, while the mouth revealed a double row of teeth and terrifyingly large fangs. Its eyes were not visible in the shadow, adding to its unnerving presence. With a realization that felt like a punch in the gut, I remembered the sounds I'd heard earlier. That low, guttural growl must have come from this creature. I was on its turf now. All my years of hiking and outdoor experience seemed to pale in the face of this unknown entity. Suddenly, the creature let out a howl, a sound so haunting and eerie it still gives me chills to think about. It was nothing like a typical wolf's howl. There was something almost human about it. I was frozen in fear, my heart pounding in my chest. The stench of rotting meat and sulfur was even stronger now, and it took all my willpower to keep myself from gagging. In a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the creature looked at me and then, surprisingly, turned and disappeared into the dense forest, its huge humped back and wide shoulders visible until the trees swallowed it. It didn't run, didn't seem scared. Rather, it moved with a strange grace, like it had all the time in the world. Once it was out of sight, I stood still, listening. The forest seemed to hold its breath along with me. After what seemed like an eternity, the silence was broken only by the distant chirping of birds. It was over, but I was left with a pounding heart and shaking legs. After the encounter, I was in shock for a while, my mind struggling to comprehend what I had just witnessed. I quickly packed up and made my way back to my camp, every little sound making me jump. I stayed awake all night, startled by every noise, half expecting the creature to return. But it didn't. Once I was out of the woods and back to civilization, I tried to research what I had seen. I found tales of mythical creatures, folklore, but nothing that really matched what I had encountered. I've also reached out to local wildlife experts, but so far no one can explain it. It's like nothing anyone's heard of around these parts. I still hike, but I can't shake the feeling of being watched whenever I'm out there in the wilderness. The world feels a little different, a little less familiar now. I hope sharing my experience might help me and maybe others who've had similar encounters feel less alone. My story is quick, but I wanted to share it with you anyway. Ever since I was a small boy, I would often go hunting with my father outside of New Orleans in the swamps. One night we were looking for game when my father found an alligator. It began to approach and my dad took a shot at it, killing it on the spot. He shot it right between the eyes. We went over to look closer when suddenly, from the bushes, this crazy man-sized lizard appeared. It was dark in color, had big orange eyes reminiscent of a cat, and reeked of decaying meat. My father instantly started shaking as he slowly started to raise his shotgun. This pterodactyl-looking thing stared at us and began to move quickly towards us. That's when we realized it was actually moving towards the dead alligator. My father aimed at it, pulling the trigger, but the shotgun jammed. Suddenly, we heard something behind us. We realized there were more of these things walking towards us from a distance. The one in front had now picked up the dead alligator and began tearing its skull open, eating it right in front of us. We stood there in shock. It reminded me of something that had torn a turtle open, eating the fresh meat. The one behind us gained distance quickly, leaping and knocking my father over. I ran as fast as I could, hoping it wouldn't chase me and leave us alone, even though this thing had scratched me while leaping over. These things let my father go. They were preoccupied with a dead alligator. My dad came running up behind me while these things stole his kill, then disappearing into the swamp. I don't know what they were, but I sure hope nobody ever has to experience such a thing like that again. The weird thing is, this happened in the 1980s, right around the same time that a boy from Skateboard Swamp saw that strange reptilian being running after him. I have no idea if they're the same thing or not, but wanted to share my side of it with you. Dear Donovan, my name is Jack and I'm a bridge welder by trade. You might be wondering why a guy who spends his days working on bridges is writing to a show host about mythical creatures. Well, even welders need hobbies, right? Mine happens to be hiking. It's a welcome break from the welding mask and torch, and I get to enjoy the peace and quiet of nature. Last weekend, I decided to take a solo trip through the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. I was halfway through my usual trail, savoring the feeling of the earth beneath my boots and the sound of leaves crunching when I noticed something was off. The usual woodland noises, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves were replaced by an eerie silence. That's when I smelled it. Sulfur. A strong, nauseating scent that made me stop dead in my tracks. It was as though someone had lit a pile of rotten eggs on fire right in the middle of the forest. I've been hiking for years, and let me tell you that smell isn't normal. And then I saw it. Standing a distance away, in a clearing was this creature, a thing straight out of a nightmare. It was massive, easily reaching 8 feet tall, and its body was a bizarre mix that reminded me of a lizard and a goat, with bat-like wings folded at its sides. Its skin was brown and scaly, like the rusted beams I often repair. The face, though, it was terrifying, glowing yellow eyes boring into mine. It looked oddly like a horse, yet twisted into something monstrous. A long tongue flicked out of a mouth filled with sharp teeth. And the way it looked at me, there was an intelligence there that made my skin crawl. The creature didn't just stand there. It moved, revealing more of its bizarre appearance. Its black skeletal body stretched grotesquely as it unfurled its wings. They weren't exactly bat-like as I initially thought, more dragon-like, leathery and huge, casting an ominous shadow on the forest floor. The thing's legs were hocked, similar to a goat's but with an eerie skeletal thinness to them. The creature's long tail whipped restlessly behind it, moving with a strange agility that contradicted its otherwise ungainly appearance. And atop its terrifying face, 2 horns protruded. They were twisted and dark as if scorched, adding to its demonic aura. Its eyes continued to glow a chilling yellow that seemed to pierce through the semi-darkness of the forest. And every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of its long tongue darting out, flicking through the air as if tasting it. But what was truly bone-chilling was when it made a sound. A low rumble echoed through the clearing. almost like a growl, but with an unnatural resonance. The kind of sound you'd expect to come from a creature of nightmares, not something standing in front of you in the flesh. The encounter didn't last long after that. It seemed to lose interest in me, those glowing eyes shifting away. With one powerful leap, it was airborne, those monstrous wings beating against the air and causing a rush of wind that nearly knocked me off my feet. The last I saw was a silhouette disappearing into the darkening sky, leaving nothing but the sulfurous smell and the haunting memory behind. After the creature flew off, I was left in a state of disarray. With my heart still hammering in my chest, I began the hasty trek back towards civilization. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. As a bridge welder, I'm used to finding solutions to structural problems. But this was beyond any logic or understanding I was equipped with. Once I reached my truck, I found my hands were still shaking. I sat there for a while, the scent of sulfur lingering in my nostrils, replaying the encounter in my mind. Eventually, I turned the key in the ignition and began the drive home, the image of the creature's glowing yellow eyes etched in my memory. Over the following days, I tried to go about my daily routine. The sound of welding filled the days and gave me a sense of normalcy. Yet, every now and then I'd find my thoughts drifting back to the creature. The smell of sulfur seemed to follow me too, no matter how many showers I took or how many times I washed my clothes. I did some research thinking I'd stumbled upon a yet undiscovered animal, maybe even a new species. The more I read, the more I came across tales of the Jersey Devil. Every description I read matched what I'd seen: the lizard goat body, the horse-like face, the sulfurous smell. I'd always dismissed such tales as folklore, but there was no denying the uncanny similarities. I've even returned to the Pine Barrens a couple of times since then, drawn by a need for answers. I didn't see the creature again, but I did find strange tracks and once again encountered that awful sulfur smell. And it's not just me, other hikers have reported similar sightings and smells in the same area. My hope in writing to you, Donovan, is not only to share my encounter, but to find some answers. Maybe your show can shine a light on this. Bring in experts. Help me and others understand what we've experienced. My old house used to sit in a nice rural area in Ohio. It was a nice, tranquil area surrounded by trees, nature, and wildlife. It was about 10 miles away from Canton, if you know where that is. It was definitely a small town vibe where everybody knew each other's name and secrets were hard to keep. There was a local reservoir that I would frequently catch catfish in. It was a really cool place, and since there wasn't much else for a young boy to do in my town, I pretty much spent every single day fishing at the reservoir. Life was simple back then, but things changed when I saw something I would never forget in that reservoir. I was spending the evening with my friends Kyle and Lenny. We were exploring the nooks and corners of our hometown. Eventually, of course, we all decided to head to the reservoir. We'd made our way to the swampy shores, hoping to catch a catfish or two, but what we found was not a catfish at all. It was something different. As we edged closer to the water, a creepy figure emerged from the dark, rippling surface. It was taller than any of us, reaching almost 7 feet. It had an unusual humanoid appearance, but with no arms in sight, a sight so surreal it seemed like it was pulled from a science fiction movie. In our shock, we tried to make sense of what we saw. Green, glowing eyes gleamed ominously in the murky darkness, and its feet, webbed and large, made a squishing sound as the thing tread across the swampy ground. Was it an escaped experiment? A cruel joke someone was playing on us? Or was it something inexplainable by anyone? Petrified, we could only stare as the creature moved toward us. Lenny, the bravest amongst us, stood his ground, not taking his eyes off the luminescent green orbs that stared right back at us. The creature stopped momentarily as if studying us before moving again. This time, its direction was clear. It was moving towards Lenny. Lenny, move. I remember yelling, but it was as if he was under some sort of trance. He just stood there captivated by the creature's glowing eyes. Before any of us could react, the creature was inches away from Lenny. The eerie silence was broken by a soft squelching sound as the creature extended what could have been its mouth. In a moment of sheer panic, Kyle and I lunged forward, grabbing Lenny by his arms and pulling him away. We didn't stick around to see what the creature did next. Adrenaline pumping, we ran as fast as we could, leaving behind the chilling squelching sounds and the glow of green eyes. That night, none of us could sleep. We were haunted by what we'd seen, by the creature that had almost gotten Lenny. It was clear to us that what we encountered was no ordinary creature. The next day, we returned to the reservoir reluctantly. We wanted answers. We found large webbed footprints, exactly where we'd seen the creature emerge from the water. A chilling reminder of our encounter. We quickly decided to report this to the local police. I'll never forget the skeptical look on the sheriff's face as we narrated our experience. He humored us, visiting the reservoir to investigate, but his skepticism faded when we saw the footprints. Even he couldn't dismiss the tangible evidence right in front of him. Though we continued to fish at the reservoir, things were never the same. Every ripple in the water would send shivers down our spines. We'd laugh it off, joking about the lake monster, but the humor was tinged with a sense of underlying fear. As for Lenny, he's never been quite the same. He's quieter, more reserved. He was no longer the bravest amongst us, and there was a wariness in his eyes, a caution that wasn't there before. We never talk about that night. It became a silent pact between us. But the memory remains, etched into our minds, a chilling reminder of the day the Charles Mill Lake monster almost got Lenny. But life has a strange way of unfolding. I eventually moved away. They were back once a year or so to visit family. So one cold winter night a few years ago, I found myself back at the reservoir. It was not a planned visit, but a spontaneous drive that led me there. Everything was just as I remembered. The cool breeze, the eerie silence, and the dark water surface. As I stood on the edge of the reservoir staring into its dark depths, I realized that the encounter with the monster had left a deeper mark on me than I initially thought. It wasn't just a memory of fear. It was a lesson, a harsh one, that humbled me and shaped me into the person I had ultimately become. My encounter with the creature was a reminder of our insignificance and the infinite mysteries that our universe holds. Even today, the thought of that strange, horrid creature sends chills down my spine. But I know I'll never be able to shake it. That monster is a part of my story, a part of who I am, and I'll never be able to shake it.